When my PlayStation 4 broke 2 years ago, I looked on Craigslist to see if I could find a good deal. Since I was a high school senior with limited funds, I didn't waste any time and texted to see if it was still available. The number texted back within 5 minutes to say it was, and when I asked if I could buy it later that day, they said yes and told me to come around 8 p.m. that night. I was eager to get the PlayStation, so I left around 7:30. It was only a 15-minute drive away, and I got there early. When I got to the house, it was, to put it bluntly, gross looking. The grass in the front yard was grossly overgrown, the driveway was full of cracks, and I could see boards covering one of the windows. I couldn't see inside any other windows because they were covered with thick blankets or something similar. There were some nice homes in the neighborhood, even though it wasn't the greatest. I sat in my car for a while, then finally texted that I was there. They replied saying the PlayStation was inside the house and I should come in. The sun was setting and I didn't feel very comfortable going to the house alone, but being the 17-year-old boy that I was, I told myself not to be scared and walked to the house. As I walked up to the door, I saw at one of the corner of my eyes the blanket cover the windows move. I knew somebody had seen me waiting in my car. I texted that I was there and they replied saying, "Just come in." I slowly opened the door, and as soon as I did, I could smell the strong, musty smell of the house. I looked inside, but all the lights were off, and I couldn't see a thing. I was getting uneasy and contemplated leaving when suddenly, a light turned on at the end of the house. I called out and said, "Hello," but no one responded, and then took a few steps inside and discovered the house was empty of any furniture. Things were just seeming too weird to me, so after deciding that it wasn't worth it, I turned to leave. As I grabbed the door, I heard footsteps coming from the other room. I didn't stop to turn around. Instead, I slammed the door behind me, ran to my car, got in, and never looked back. When I got home, I found a text message from the man telling me that I shouldn't have left. I had blocked the number and decided I was better off looking for a PS4 on eBay instead. My family wanted a new TV in the house, so we decided to sell the old one. We listed it on Craigslist, and after a few days, a man named Charles responded to the ad and requested to come see the TV. We scheduled a time, and Charles came over. He appeared to be an ordinary guy, had an old truck, and told us that he worked in construction. My dad and I invited him to our living room to show him the TV. He seemed to like it a lot, and we assumed he'd buy it. However, after a while, he said we'd have to pass, and then he left. We were disappointed that he didn't buy it, but we figured it would sell anyways. Later that night, I was in bed playing a game on my phone. I heard what sounded like something scraping on my window. I thought it was a tree branch or a bug, but then I heard it again. It was loud enough to make me get up and go look out the window. I didn't see anything, so I went back to bed. I sat on my phone for a while, but then I got tired, so I shut my phone off, closed my eyes, and just as I closed my eyes, I heard it again. But this time it sounded more of a tapping. I had my back towards the window, so I rolled over to my other side to look, and when I did, I saw what appeared to be the back of a man, and I immediately recognized it was Charles, the man from the house earlier. I got up, walked over to the window, but he was gone. I went to my parents' room, but they were already asleep. I thought about waking up my dad, but I figured I'd probably scare the man off anyways. I went to all the doors in the house to make sure they were locked, and I went back to my bedroom. I had a hard time falling asleep, but eventually I did. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound coming from my window, again. I looked over to see a man about halfway through the window coming into my room. I screamed like a little girl to the top of my lungs. The man backed out of the window and went back outside. My dad came into the room shortly after. He immediately ran to the window, but the man had already run away again. And when my dad went outside and couldn't find him, he contacted the police to report an incident. It turns out the lock on my window was faulty, and that's how he got into my room. The memory of it to this day still gives me the chills. I'm a 19-year-old girl, and last summer I wanted to buy a new car because my old one's transmission went out. I went to Craigslist because I had purchased my last car there, and I felt they had the best prices. I found a 2013 Nissan Altima that I liked, and the price was reasonable, so I contacted the seller to see if I could go take a look at it. He said his name was Brian and he would be available on Friday evening, which was the next day. I agreed, and the next day I went to go take a look at the car. Originally, we had planned to meet at 6 p.m., but Brian ended up moving it to 7 p.m. saying he had some stuff to take care of. We met at his house. I drove there in my dad's car that he was letting me use to go look at the Nissan. Brian lived in a fairly average-looking neighborhood, and his house looked pretty decent. When I arrived, I saw the white Nissan. I texted him that I was there, and he said he would be out in a minute. Once he came out of his house, I got out of my car to go meet him. We shook hands, and he began to tell me about the car. I spent about 15 minutes looking at the car from the inside and the outside. He asked if I wanted to take it for a test drive. I said yes, and he gave me the keys. I got inside and started the car while he got in the passenger seat. I drove the car away from his house and onto a busy road. The car drove so well, and I began to consider buying it. He talked a lot to me while I was driving, which I found a little annoying. but didn't mind too much because I assumed he was just a talkative guy. After about 10 minutes, I told him I was going to turn around and head back. He looked surprised and told me to drive it around a little more. I said okay and continued driving. At one point, he told me to turn left, and I thought he was leading me to his house. After a while, he told me to turn right, so I did, but I didn't recognize where we were at all. Once again, I told him we should head back and that I was interested in buying the car. Then I told him I really didn't know where we were. He said it would be easier if he drove because it was a bit complicated. I said okay, and we pulled over and switched seats. As soon as he got in, I noticed he locked the doors, which made me a little concerned, but I figured he just did it out of habit. He pulled out onto the street and started driving. We drove silently for a couple minutes. After about 10 minutes had passed, I realized we should be getting close to his house. I asked him if we were almost there, but he didn't respond. About another 10 minutes passed by, and I began to get extremely concerned. When I put out my phone to text my mom about what was happening, the man asked me what I was doing and told me to put my phone away. I told him no and asked where he was taking me. He then attempted to take my phone. I tucked my knees into my chest and held my phone close to me. At that point, he pulled over and stopped the car. I reclined my seat back as far as it would go and moved away from him to the back seat. He looked at me and ordered me to hand over my phone. He said he didn't want to hurt me and wouldn't if I cooperated with him. We were parked on a busy road, and to my surprise, after a few minutes of arguing, a truck pulled over behind us. A man got out of his truck and came over to the driver's side window. He was a really big-looking man wearing a hoodie, a cape, and pants. When Brian pulled down his window, the man asked if we were good and if we needed a tow or anything. I knew I needed to get out of this car somehow, and this was my only chance. Brian started to respond saying everything was fine, but I interrupted him by saying that no, everything was not all right. I believe the man could sense the panic in my face and asked Brian to get out of the car because I knew something was wrong with the back exhaust. Brian hesitated but got out. I wasted no time in unlocking the doors and running out. I ran to the man's truck and stood by the passenger door. The man asked me what I was doing, and I asked him if I could get a ride. I guess Brian realized he was no match for the larger man because he ran to his car and drove away. I called the police, and the man in the truck drove me back to my father's car at Brian's, where the police met us, of course. Brian was gone, but we were able to get his license plate as well as the Craigslist listing. Within a couple days, they were able to catch Brian. I ended up getting a new car several weeks later, but I don't look at them alone anymore.